NSFW judges of Reddit. What are some of the weirdest cases you've seen? Studied forensics. And a defense lawyer told me this story. He is called to defend a client who accused of robbing a garage in a nearby city. Police found his fingerprints in a Coke machine. Yes. In a Coke machine. As in the disassembled and vending machine, and dusted it. And found a print on an internal component. Oh. Here's the catch. The suspect was currently serving a prison sentence at the time of the crime. So this was the prosecutor's theory. Suspect had broken out of jail. Drove 2 hours to that garage. Burglarized it. Opened up the Coke machine. Left his fingerprint inside it and nowhere else. Reassembled it. Drove back 2 hours. And snuck back in jail. Surprisingly, this case didn't get tossed out laughing and actually went to court. The good news for the suspect is that his lawyer discovered that before his incarceration he happened to work for the business that maintained the Coke machine. So he was trying to explain the fingerprint by saying it could have been left there when the suspect performed maintenance. He hired a fingerprint expert, who was able to demonstrate that police used the wrong method for lifting a print. Not a judge, but a reporter who covers courts. The weirdest case I covered was a man getting caught giving a handjob to a pit bull. It wasn't sexual. He wanted the dog to impregnate his dog. But the male pit bull's owner refused. So the man broke in and got caught collecting semen. The guy was charged with bestiality. His lawyer argued that charge had to have an element of sexual pleasure for the defendant. He said his client should have been charged with theft of biological material. Well, I'm not a judge, but I was in traffic court once and the following exchange happened. So, Miss Defendant, you're here for a seat cushion violation? Is that even a thing? Apparently, Your Honor. The officer said I was too short. Long discussion with the state attorney and judge followed. They had white noise, but you could see the judge was clearly thinking this was an idiotic ticket. How tall are you, miss? About 5 feet. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Case dismissed. I looked it up later. There is a real restriction in Florida to say you need a raised seat if you are very short to see over the steering wheel, but this is presumably for people with dwarfism or other such conditions rather than petite women. Edit. Apparently this is no longer a thing. The state must have thought it was stupid also. Not a judge. But in the U.S. Navy I was a legal officer on a ship. My captain has the ability to administer punishment for violating military law. We had a sailor who broke the law, and after the captain found him guilty, the sailor said he would jump overboard. No one took him seriously, and sure enough, he went out to the weather deck and jumped right in the ocean. We had to recover him with one of our small boats, and he threatened to do it again a week later. I'm not a judge, but a legal case involving alleged identical twins once landed on my desk. It somehow hinged on whether or not they were identical or just fraternal twins. They had an identical set of Cody's results. One party claimed that proved they were twins. The other party argued that all it demonstrated was that they were not excluded from being identical twins. So they might not actually be identical. Apparently that was worth paying me reasonable amounts of money to demonstrate, mathematically, that if two siblings share 15 Cody's markers, they are identical twins with a certainty of 99% rather than just being fraternal or just siblings. I have no idea what that case was about or why that was such a controversial piece of evidence. Obligatory not a judge, but had my first argument before the Second Circuit. So obviously fairly nervous. The case before me had a very generic name. Think Smith vs. Generic Insurance Corp. Figured it was going to be dull. But instead, it turned out that the issue was that Mrs. Smith A widow. Had her husband's life insurance payment denied. Why? Husband was an engineer of some sort and had constructed a device to pleasure himself. He plugged said device into a wall socket onto enjoy on Easter Sunday, while his family was out, but unfortunately was electrocuted and died, and presumably was found by his poor family on Easter, pantsless and plugged into the wall. The insurer tried to deny benefits based on an exclusion for intentional self-harm. Cue a solid 20 minutes of the insurer's lawyer being grilled by very state and conservative judges as to whether the poor guy actually intended to harm himself. Or, as one judge put it very mildly, it seems the deceased intended, well, the opposite. And the insurer lawyer struggling to articulate why self-harm and sexual pleasure are not always mutually exclusive. From the questions, it seemed like the widow was likely to win. But man, was that awkward for everyone involved. Worked in LE for a long while. Escorted an inmate to court for his dismemberment and murder charges trial. He chose to represent himself. Context. Was infatuated with Charles Manson and cults. Started one that preyed on mentally unstable/handicapped women and killed them if they tried to leave. This poor girl with autism wanted to go home. He killed her with his followers' help. Chopped her up. And burned the pieces in a dumpster. His opening statement was something along the lines of, "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, I just want to clarify that things being inserted into my butt are going to come up in this trial. I'm not gay. I just liked it." The judge said, "What the feep?" but caught himself before dropping the F-bomb. Everyone in the courtroom laughed at him. It was thrown out and he went for mental health screenings. I don't miss LE work at all. I did accrue a speep load of stories though. Not a judge. My father worked court services as a police officer and came home and told me about the case. We had a few very rural areas around where I lived. The case was brought because the daughter had reported to a friend that her dad and two brothers had taken her out to the woods and had sex with her. While the judge was trying to explain to the father why this is wrong, he replied, "Well, how else is she supposed to a stranger? I don't think I have ever seen my father drink as much as he did that night." Also grew up in a rural area. A local pastor had a story about how a member of his congregation that lived up in the mountains took a lot of convincing that his young daughter couldn't assume her deceased mother's wifely duties. The sheriff had heard about it and shown up to investigate. And the guy told him that what he was doing violated man's law, not God's. So the sheriff came and got THR pastor to tell him that God also would like him to knock it off. Also not a judge. But I work with a psychologist who does some work in mental hospitals and has to testify as to whether they should or should not be released. Court is over the phone right now because of COVID. So I was privy to the little exchange. My boss's patient is schizophrenic and was refusing his medication. My boss was testifying as to why he shouldn't be released, violent to his family. Active psychosis. Much to the patient's displeasure. The patient starts yelling, "Man, I want to get out of here. It's so nasty. They got snakes in here." The judge replied, "Sir, the quickest way to get released is to comply with your medication. And the medication will also help you with your snake problem." I was in court once. Next up. Behind a guy on trial for a slew of charges around child abuse and rape. The dude told the judge if she's not of age to consent, how can her testimony be valid? Judge proceeded to unload on this man and give him a chance to speak before she handed down a sentence. Dude said word for word, "How are you going to treat her like an adult and me a criminal when I'm the one facing charges?" She proceeded to beep him up and he got like 20 life and I was next. Speep myself before I even stood up. I'm a lawyer considering whether to someday be a judge. The dildo bomber was the oddest case I've worked on so far. Boyfriend gets dumped in spring. Stalks ex-girlfriend for 9 months. He's known to have an obsessive interest in bombs and explosives. And is a significant meth head. In December, he delivers a package to ex-girlfriend. There's no return address. But it says Merry Christmas bitch. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out who sent it. Ex calls the cops. Who call the bomb squad. Who open the package. Inside is a large vibrator that's been hollowed out and filled with explosives. He apparently assumed that she would eagerly use it and blow herself up. This is how you know that men and women think differently. I think that has little to do with men and women but human and meth head. Yeah, exactly. Turn this situation round. If I found a box from my ex on my doorstep with a fleshlight in it, am I seriously putting my dick in it? I mean, at least 90-something% not. At least.